Let me also tell you that there are some reductions to providers in here, okay, for physicians and hospitals. The situation, though, is with what we're talking about, we have now given the providers a roadmap to understanding where we want to go with this. I mean, we could have come in here and gone across the board and just cut this and cut that. I mean, frankly, it's pretty stunning. I wake up in the morning and I ask the good Lord how He sent these people here. Because that's what it took, real creativity and ingenuity. So, a hospital may say, well, I need more money. And first of all, with this hospital tax, there are some hospitals that have a heavy Medicaid population. We're going to go to the hospital association and say, if you want to divide this money up that can help to deal with that overload there, we want to do it. It's not perfect, but it draws down a big chunk of federal dollars. I mean, John McCarthy, our Medicaid guy, we made a decision last weekend. I said we need another $30 million in there because was that what it was? Another $30 million to draw down another $100 million. So we've drawn down as much federal dollars as we can. But in regard to the providers, what we're hopeful of is they're going to understand where we're going. It's rational. That we allow them to have a reasonable transition to the new programs. And so when Bill Cohen says, are these all cuts or whatever, it doesn't work that way. If you design this thing the right way, you reduce the impact of the resources in a way that people say, I can get with that program. That makes sense. Instead of just kind of slashing people. You see what I'm saying? And you can get with Greg, look at all the numbers, and he'll walk you through them. It's not an attempt to move the shells around here. Yes, ma'am?
Does this budget cut anybody off Medicaid, or does it cut services provided? Does it restrict eligibility?
It does not change eligibility. Federal law currently prohibits changes in income eligibility to the program. Before I mentioned that there's usually this temptation to do things that affect everybody. For example, cutting certain optional services tends to affect everybody. We don't do that in this budget.
I mean, frankly, when you think about that, it's pretty amazing, right? We're not dropping the people, and we're trying to design something that deals. You saw that chart earlier. I hope you'll put it in the paper. 4% drive up the vast majority of the Medicaid costs. 1% of them we can't do anything about, but 3% of them we can. And if we can move them through the system, I mean, have you ever had to deal with the healthcare system? I mean, you talk about a maze and a lack of understanding, and how many conversations have people had with themselves about, if only we had done this for mom or that, because it's so complicated. We're trying to make it a simpler thing to understand where you can get direction instead of standing in line and being confused about what the heck is going on with your treatment. Yes, sir. Joe?
Governor, on the revenue side, can you talk about the aggregate money raised and fee increases and loophole closings and what it
Yeah, the fee increases are less than a couple billion, is that right? About $2 billion, so there's no, frankly, Joe, we struggle with 2 million. Did I say that, or I say 2 billion? Yeah, there's a couple billion in there. No, 2 million. And look, we have to start thinking about legitimate user fees. We haven't done much of it in this budget because it just get everybody all worked up. But, a legitimate user fee is something that needs to be considered. And, you get yourself in a trick bag when you're working through all that. But that's something that we're going to spend more time on. We had to go through this with the highway patrol, and what do you raise, and how do you fund them, and all that, and what's the legitimate deal. But we didn't want to jerk somebody's title costs up, whatever Keene was trying to put over on us. We stopped them. Yes.
Governor, what would you say with $8 billion going away, and you've emphasized the first year will be rougher than the second? As you speak to Ohioans today, who are you asking to sacrifice? Is it the Medicaid recipient? Is it the troopers?
No.
Cities and towns?
No.
Who is sacrificing?
No, you know what? Honestly, if people want to work through this, they can. It's just a matter of whether they don't want to cooperate, whether they don't want to participate. There's always, when you look at $14 billion worth of payroll, when you look at the populations that Mark flashed up on the screen, there's a tendency when things get difficult for people to think, I got to take care of me. The reason why we love the Chilean miners is because when they were down there, they said, it's all together. Somebody once said, we either hang together or we hang separately. We are not asking any one group of people to give up any more, really, than any other group of people in exchange for their children having a better future. You must understand that this budget, with preserving the tax cut, coupled with Jobs Ohio, and getting rid of silly rules and regulations that kill small business, we're creating a platform for growth, for job creation, for resurgence of a state. I hope you all understand we're talking about the entire Midwest in trouble. The coasts have raided us. The South has raided us. The Southwest has raided us. This is our opportunity to give ourselves a fighting chance to get back up on our feet again. And I would ask not only the people out there who are affected, but I would ask the journalists that cover this. Frankly, I can't read your mind, but there's a pretty good put together proposal here. Pretty comprehensive. This could not have been done, by the way, in 9 years? Oh, I'm sorry, 9 weeks. This has been a process that has gone on for years. And that's why, Jim, we didn't have to rely on across-the-board cuts or things that we have to, we're going to have to apologize for stuff in here. I'm sure we've done a couple things in here that, watch what I say because I'll get quoted the wrong way. But I'm sure we've done some things in here that we'll have to fix. That's the part of any, $8 billion. Yes, sir.
Governor, there's a cut to the local government fund of $555 million over both years combined. There's also phased out payments to local school districts and governments of about $1.3 billion. I'm sure that the local governments, if they were here, they would say, you're passing the buck down to the local level. What would you say to folks who are going to be looking at $2 billion less in payments from the state?
Well, I think first of all, we're not passing the buck to anybody. I think it's just important that local governments have to do everything they can to get their budgets in order. And the fact is that if we don't take actions, what are we going to do? As I pointed out to you, the federal government got rid of revenue sharing in the 1970s. This is nothing more than revenue sharing. We collect the money and they spend it. They need to become much more efficient. That's part of the reason why you've seen the tools provided, both in this budget and separate from this budget, to help local governments to be able to act like a business. And it is critical. And look, longer term, we got to think about how many of these things do we need? Can we have greater efficiency if we allow these governments to be combined? Now, this has been written about for 10 years, and no politician wants to say it. But I'm going to tell you, we're going to get a commission to take a look at how much government we have in this state. And so that's number one. They need to step it up, and they need to do the things that we're doing here to get ourselves on the right track. Because if the same thing keeps going on, the loss of payroll is going to escalate, and the jobs are going to continue to leave. They need to do better. Secondly, in terms of the TPP and the kilowatt hour tax, let me tell you about that. That was scheduled for phase out. We have done nothing more than phase that out in a quicker period of time. And for those districts that were heavily dependent on that, we protected them in this. Tim Keene has come up with a program whereby that if you don't need it, if you're wealthier, yours is going to phase out. But if you are heavily dependent on this, we've got a way to help you deal with that. And Tim, you want to make a comment on this? But I think it is totally amazing that that foundation state support, not totally amazing, it was our intention. But it's great to be able to achieve the basic foundation formula in this state with money increasing.
First, remember that in the general revenue fund, 15% of the general revenue fund is state operating costs, and 85% is money that we pass to other entities. And in the all funds, the number is similar, but just with a slightly larger government operation perspective. So what we do, as the governor said, is we pass money to other folks. So when we look at our budget, it's necessarily the case that there will be reductions to some of those subsidy payments. Having said that, again, I think what we've done with the local government fund and with the library. And first of all, Aaron, I would say the numbers that you're quoting, they reflect that they overstate the reduction in payments that these entities will get from what they received this fiscal year, because those numbers are against the statutory amount that they would have otherwise received, which none of them are getting right now. So, I mean, know that. Or in some cases they're not getting. You know, with regard to the tangible personal property and kilowatt hour tax, recall that in both of these instances there were local property taxes that were determined to be unconstitutional, problematic, or economically difficult in this state, the latter with regard to the TPP. Referring to the TPP, there was a bill passed in 2006 that eliminated that. There was a 5-year absolute hold harmless for all political subdivisions and schools, and there was a 7-year slow phase-out. So for quite some time, these entities should have known. The law was saying these dollars are going to go away. All we've done is, in the aggregate, accelerated the phase-out period of time. But for those that are heavily dependent, that have the greatest reliance, we put together a mechanism that basically looks at what your total state and local revenues are. And we are limiting the loss in your TPP payment to no more than 2 percentage points of that revenue capacity. And then that sets a phase-out period. So if you're lightly dependent on tangible personal property tax, like half the school districts in this state have less than 2% dependence, you know, that you'll see that payment go away in the first year. But if you are heavily dependent, like I believe Cuyahoga Heights, we will continue to phase you out over a period of, I believe it's 15 years in the case of Cuyahoga Heights.
Better than the current law.
Exactly. So, again, in some cases, the acceleration is a little faster than people might have thought. But in many cases, particularly those who are most dependent, for whom this could have been the greatest problem, this is better than the current law that they have right now.
Just to follow up, Tim, you said my 1.8 number that or excuse me, 1.3 number billion that I was using was overstating it. What would be a fair number?
I'll have to talk to you later.
Okay.
Yes.
Governor, what's being put in place, or if there's any discussion on a tuition cap at higher ed for those that might try to make?
It's the 3.5%. You know, I think the universities are not thrilled with that. As you all know, I worked at the universities. Gentleman to your right works at the university. I'm comfortable in saying I've seen glaciers move faster than decision making at our universities. There's plenty of room for improvement, and you know, I've had a very nice conversation with Gordon Gee. He says that this bill absolutely recognizes the importance of higher ed, and I think higher ed is one of the great engines of potential economic growth in the state. We can get them to commercialize, provide a better curriculum, and also to work with community colleges and technical schools that have a seamless way to educate our people for the jobs that exist.
Governor,
Yes, sir.
clarify or have Tim clarify why even in that bill that wage gap of this budget spending about 10% more than GRF normal budget?
Well, that's all about the way in which when you operate across the whole field, there are ways in which you have to look at this differently. We have a new reality in terms of the way you want to look at the budget. Here's a good quote. Tim, why don't you get up and explain what that means? You know, when you draw down federal dollars, it looks like your spending's gone up and all that.
Well, look, I mean, the general revenue fund goes up about 1% the first year and about 6% the second, which I think is the numbers that you referred to. There's a variety of things going on here. One is, remember, this federal stimulus money is now gone. So there are expenses that were Medicaid expenses that were paid outside the general revenue fund that now have to be shifted back into the general revenue fund. I mean, if you look at the total percentage of state GRF resources that are committed to the Medicaid program, they go up by, I think it's 4 percentage points from where it was in the last biennium. So that's $750 million plus that suddenly has to get shifted on to the state general revenue fund from where it was previously. In addition, there's some part of the Medicaid reform effort brings on to the GRF several Medicaid programs in both years that are partially off the GRF. Now, the Department of Aging, the Passport program, moves on to the GRF completely. Right now, in Aging's budget, there's $100 and some million. That's in the GRF, but the federal match is outside of the GRF. when you move that passport program onto Medicaid, that there's $300 million, give or take, in matching money that follows it into the GRF, that drives up the GRF growth rate. If we didn't do that, and look, the governor told me, this is not about gimmicks, I want to do the right thing from a policy perspective, and the numbers will fall where they may. The growth rates will fall when they may. Well, I didn't like it because we could have had a negative number in the first year. This budget could have contracted, but we wanted to do this Medicaid reform endeavor and do the right thing from a policy perspective. And so there are additional things like that that I'll be happy to talk with all of you about at length.
This is all the world of budget geekery. You know, one thing I want you to know is, you know, the compass has always been just do the right policy. You do the right policy, you'll get the right result, and it's the right politics. I mean, even if you get hammered, that's life. I mean, we're not here to, you know, be courting special interest groups. You know, we're here to do the best we can do to get this thing done. Yes, sir, in the back.
I brought a prop. That's definitely a budget, but whether the jobs are out there is still to be determined. This is the first issue of Harvard Business Review for this year. It says, it cites the noted political economist Michael Porter, how to fix capitalism and unleash the rate of its growth. His answer is shared value between companies and communities. At the same time, Fareed Zakaria of Time magazine